North Korea vowing to beef up their nuclear arsenal as nations around the world warn them it's time to stop. Dictator Kim Jong-Un telling scientists he wants to increase the quality and number of deadly weapons. But Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says now is the time for diplomacy.
We're ready to talk anytime North Korea would like to talk. And we're ready to have the first meeting without precondition. It's not realistic to say we're only going to talk if you come to the table ready to give up your program. They have too much invested in it.
Last month, North Korea launched its most advanced missile yet, potentially capable of striking anywhere in the U.S.
Dialogue with the North is out of the question until the regime changes its behavior. That's coming from the White House on Wednesday local time. It contradicts earlier remarks by its top diplomat that the U.S. is ready for talks without preconditions. Kwon Jang-ho reads into the conflicting statements.
A spokesperson for the White House told Reuters on Wednesday that now is not the time for negotiations with North Korea, given its recent ballistic missile test. The official said that any negotiations with North Korea must wait until the regime improves its behavior, which must include no further nuclear or missile tests. This comes in stark contrast to remarks made by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on Tuesday, who seemed to go against the Trump administration's hardline policy by saying the U.S. was ready to hold talks with Pyongyang at any time without preconditions.
Let's just meet, and we can talk about the weather if you want. But can we at least sit down and see each other face to face? And then we can begin to lay out a map, a roadmap of what we might be willing to work towards.
The State Department was quick to try and clarify its position on Wednesday as well, with spokesperson Heather Nauert stressing there was no change in the North Korea policy and that the administration would be ready to talk to Pyongyang if they showed signs they were serious, but so far there have not been any.
First and foremost, diplomacy is our top priority. We have worked very hard on our maximum pressure or peaceful pressure campaign. We continue to work on that every single day. The second thing is the policy has not changed. I just want to be very clear on that. We remain open to dialogue, and we've long said this. We remain open to dialogue when North Korea is willing to conduct a credible dialogue on the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We are not seeing any evidence that they are ready to sit down and have those kinds of conversations right now. Some of you may say, well, that sounds like it's without preconditions. No, we would say that's actually in accordance to international norms. When somebody is shooting off ballistic missiles, when someone is conducting advanced nuclear tests, they're not showing any kind of interest or seriousness about wanting to sit down to talk. At some point, we would like to do that, but our policy has not changed.
That is, I mean, you know, I know he said that there are no preconditions on what would be discussed at the talks, but I think he used the word caveat, which is the same, I think, as a precondition, isn't it? The precondition is they have to stop testing for some while or to demonstrate their willingness to come to the table. Is that correct?
Look, North Korea has been choosing to, regrettably, to show that they are serious about talking. Our policy has not changed. We have long said that at some point we would be willing, when the time is right, and clearly the time is not right now, when the time is right to sit down and have conversations with them. But we are not seeing that they are interested in doing that, and so our policy hasn't changed. We are on the same page at the White House and at the State Department.
But I just want to make clear, in effect, that is a precondition. The precondition is that they stop testing. Is that right?
Look,
as a show of good faith.
I think as a show of good faith, to not test would certainly be a smart idea, and I think everyone in this administration would agree with that.
No, but he said that there are no preconditions, and I just want to get at this. Everyone is saying that he said he's ready to talk with no preconditions. Doesn't he have a precondition? The precondition is no testing.
Look, all of what the Secretary has said and the administration has said in the past is that we are willing to sit down and have conversations with them, but now is not the right time. Our policy has not changed. Our policy has not changed. I can't be any more clear than that. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you just mentioned, you said that what you want is a credible dialogue on the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and that's the policy. I mean, that's not what he said yesterday, though. He said that he's happy to get in the room for that first conversation to talk about the size of the table
Or the weather.
or the weather. So that seems to be a discrepancy.
Look, the secretary then went on to say, I think they clearly understand that if we're going to talk, I'm quoting here, we have to have a period of quiet. We've got to have a period of quiet or it's going to be very difficult to have any kind of discussions. We would need a period of quiet, and we certainly haven't seen anything of that sort.
I just have two quick follow-ups on that. I mean, that's separate from the issue of talking about denuclearization. So what you said now is that he is willing to have a credible discussion about denuclearization. But what he said yesterday is the administration is willing to talk about other things.
Look, I can tell you our policy has not changed. If you mention talking about other things, we do happen to have some Americans who are still being held in North Korea. That would be an area that would be a fertile ground to have conversations about. I'm not aware of any conversations taking place, but that would be an example of some kind of conversation that could take place right now.
To get in the room and talk about the size of the table, as he said yesterday?
Look, I think our position is clear that he is not. I mean Kim Jong-Un, is not showing any level of seriousness about sitting down and having conversations right now.
Just one more follow-up. Jong-Un he's in Asia now. He will be in Thailand. Is he meeting with North Korean officials in Chiang Mai?
He is not. So a little bit about Ambassador Yoon, and I know there's always a lot of interest in Ambassador Yoon. He will be in Bangkok December 14th and 15th. Our special representative on North Korea policy, that is his official title, he'll meet with a variety of Thai government officials. The Thai government, and I know you ask about this a lot, Alicia, has been one of those governments that has pledged to be helpful on our maximum pressure campaign. That will be the topic of discussion between Ambassador Yoon and Thai officials. They will continue to talk about the international threat posed by the DPRK. Ambassador Yoon will not be meeting with the DPRK on that trip. Okay. Anything else related to North Korea? Hi.
Not to belabor the point, but the Secretary said yesterday it's not realistic to say we're only going to talk if you come to the table ready to give up your program. They have too much invested in it, and the President is very realistic about that as well. So how is that not a change in policy when previously it was denuclearization of the peninsula?
Well, that still remains our policy goal, denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. That has not changed either. But the point is that we could only sit down and have talks when they're showing a seriousness about being ready to sit down and have talks. And when you're firing off ballistic missiles and you're doing advanced nuclear testing, no one is showing that they're serious about talking. But the overall policy on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is something we continue to support.
But after a period of calm, you can sit down without asking that the goal of this first meeting is denuclearization. I mean,
I'm sorry, say that again?
You said in August, the Secretary said a condition of those talks is there is no future where North Korea holds nuclear weapons. Yesterday he said we can have a first meeting without speaking about denuclearization.
I think the Secretary was on the...
These contradictory statements fuel further speculation that Tillerson's relationship with the President is becoming increasingly strained. Reports emerged last month that Trump was considering a plan to remove him from his administration. But regardless of Tillerson's offer of dialogue, Pyongyang may not be willing to sit down for talks just yet anyway. Bloomberg reported on Wednesday that the UN official Jeffrey Feltman, who recently returned from a trip to North Korea, told Security Council members in a closed-door briefing that the regime plans to continue developing its nuclear program until it achieves a deterrent capability, and until then is not likely to engage in talks.
I'd like to say that India's policy was one of non-alignment, which frankly did not give very many good results to India. And today, in my view, the policy is all alignment. You have very correctly said that we had a meeting with the Russian, Indian and Chinese foreign ministers. It was an extremely cordial meeting, especially between the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers. There was a lot of warmth and cordiality. And now today you have this other meeting with a different set of partners, Australia and Japan, for example. Now the reality of the situation is, so far as all these countries are concerned, every one of these countries is concerned about the situation in the Korean Peninsula. They may have differences of approach, but the objective is the same. And I think the objective of India is the objective of everybody in this list, whether it's Russia, China,
it then?
Australia or Japan, which is somehow to ensure that North Korea denuclearizes.
All right. Denuclearizes through what kind of channel? That is, I guess, the most important thing. Let me go to you, Mrs. Guasoni, in Washington, D.C. We are reading different sides. The joint military exercise between South Korea, Japan, and the United States, this certainly is going to further irritate Pyongyang, as South Korea, Japan, and the United States argued that Pyongyang irritated them earlier with the weapon advancement. The other thing is, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General just came back from Pyongyang once in a 6-year trip to Pyongyang. Thirdly, we also see China's so-called double suspension suggestion has been more seriously considered by both sides. Fourthly, we are seeing also the UN giving the warning that the sanctions might cause further deterioration of situation for a winter in North Korea. How should we read all of these mixed signs? Mrs. Guasoni.
Well, I think Jeffrey Feltman, the UN Undersecretary, came back and said there is an urgent need to sit down and talk. And I think we should take his recommendation very seriously. It's very hard to know the impact of the sanctions on North Korea. Even Feltman, I'm sure, did not travel throughout the country, and of course what he sees will be closely restrained by the North Koreans. So we don't exactly know, whether collapse is imminent. I don't think anyone really wants a collapse of the North Korean regime. That would spell a humanitarian disaster. But in terms of these recent drills, the drills are conducted with many different objectives in mind. One is to reassure our allies, South Koreans and Japanese. The other is to test equipment. I understand the North Koreans find many of these exercises provocative, and some of them undoubtedly are. For example, decapitation exercises, right? This latest ballistic missile tracking exercise, that's a defensive maneuver, right? So I don't think that North Korea may very well find it provocative, but this particular one is not meant to be provocative. They are done to test technology, to reassure each other, and to test procedures.
Okay, you got your explanation over there, Mr. Rong.
Very sort of complicated and situated, and also I would say dangerous situations. And we certainly have the messages that is confusing or mixed. But in the meantime, we also see some positive, if I can say. And
we'd love to hear about the positive side from the Chinese
side.
That,
of course, on the Chinese side, we have always proposed for a kind of early sort of resumption of dialogues, which I think China has already provided a roadmap working with the Russians that the suspension for suspension initiate. But
just to explain to our viewers, double suspension means that the DPRK suspend its nuclear program, weapon program. Well, the United States and South Korea, some of the other allies, they suspend any military drills or exercise programs.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, that is meant to, as a first step, to reduce the tension that has been very high on the peninsula, and could easily lead to possible miscalculations. And in the meantime, I also took notice that there are some news, as I said, for example, the visit by the Undersecretary of the UN, Mr. Feltman, could be regarded as a positive news in some sense, because the invitation was extended by North Korea at the General Assembly in September, and finally it took place. So at least I think the first in 6 years, it is the first, I think, very important opportunity for exchanges, for communications.
But
I think certainly we have to look at the bigger picture, the broader context. I think the North Korea's nuclear issues is largely, primarily an issue of security. The security, I think, between the U.S. on the one hand and North Korea on the other. So I believe, and this happened in the context of the evolving sort of situation, particularly I think the perceived the shifting of the balance of power.
Right.
So that's why we have seen so many diplomatic initiatives and interactions, minilateral things.
A lot. Very intense. In fact, recently, Mr. Nalapadi.
China is a very important part of the Indo-Pacific. I mean, China is by now the second largest economy in the world. It's a very important part of the Indo-Pacific. And so far as India is concerned, India is also a growing economy. And frankly, India's trade with East Asia is many times more than its trade with South Asia or even with Southeast Asia. So East Asia is extremely important economically for India. Therefore, it's quite obvious that there would be a very much stronger relationship with Japan, which is an important part of East Asia. So as I said before, India frankly is now entering into a policy of all alignment. We are aligned with every power in a sense that will give a certain amount of advantage and leverage to us. On the one side we have China and Russia, on the other side we have Australia, Japan and the United States. And my own personal view is that these two blocs are never going to come into an actual conflict with each other, for the simple reason there's so much of trade, there's so much of interaction, and there's so much dependence on each other that a war would be disastrous for all sides.
Mr. Squasoni, I want
things started in 2015. The Indo-Pacific Alliance, you know, this is something that, right, exactly, Abe was trying to push. However, I think that, you know, the U.S., particularly President Trump, he's a wild card, right? I don't know so much that he's withdrawn leadership, but I think his foreign policy, at least as it's viewed in Washington, is perplexing, right? So that does create a bit of a vacuum for other players to move in. There is somewhat, I think, a sense that there's a need to balance China. You can look at it in a more positive light rather than simply countering China. And I think that some of the countries in the, if you want to say, use that term, Indo-Pacific region, are keen on doing that. The question is, with respect to North Korea, you know, can those different multilateral arrangements do anything? Who do the North Koreans want to talk to? They want to talk to the United States. They view the United States as a threat. And so the United States very specifically has to take a leadership role, but in conjunction with all the concerned states in the region. China is obviously, you know, a key player. So is South Korea and Japan. You know, South Korea is not part of this Indo-Pacific alliance, and so that's a big question. What role will they play, if any?